and welcome to the Energy Talk podcast. My name is Olubunmi Olajide, and it feels so good to be able to say that again. It's been quite a while since our last episode, and we're back with a brand new season for the Energy Talk. It's my pleasure today to introduce a new series which will be hosted by Marilyn Smith of the Energy Action Project and co-produced by the Global SDG 7 Hubs, a flagship program under village empowerment. Across 8 episodes, the Energy Talk will speak to leaders across areas of technology, policy, financing, and creating enabling ecosystems to probe the interlinked areas of clean energy, climate resilience, and people's well-being. While celebrating solutions, this series also investigates ongoing challenges. Now, access to modern reliable energy is a critical underlying condition for development, and at the same time, the way we consume energy can also be deeply impactful to the fate of humanity on this planet. In a bid to achieve our energy development targets today, a great deal of focus and investment is directed towards strategies that ensure supply of electricity and does not question its need and consumption pattern. To ensure energy access from this perspective is truly empowering. A range of entities across the global south are joining forces to develop and deploy highly efficient distributed energy-driven systems from the demand side of the equation. Now I'm passing off to Marilyn to talk more about the series, and hope you enjoy.
In 2015, access to energy made it to the global political agenda by being included in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. By 2030, SDG 7 aims to achieve 3 goals: deliver universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services, boost substantially the share of renewables in the global energy mix, and double the rate of improvement in energy efficiency. From the get-go, a gaping disconnect was evident, particularly in relation to electrification. Existing energy systems are designed to deliver supply where demand already exists, and have a strong incentive to increase supply in order to grow. But for millions of communities living in remote regions or under-resourced areas, electricity via traditional grids would never be a means to address the real challenge: a total lack of access to modern energy services. Around the globe, grassroots thinkers have come up with simple but holistic solutions that operate independently as off-grid systems. A second key difference is that these approaches aim to ensure affordable and appropriate energy solves local development challenges. To set the stage for this podcast series, we've brought together 2 people who have been working on energy access since before it became an SDG. Harish Hande, founder of SELCO Foundation based in India, is globally recognized as a pioneer in designing distributed energy solutions as a means to truly empower communities by enabling livelihoods and improving health. His approach of creating enabling ecosystems is being replicated throughout a network of entrepreneurs and organizations across the global south. Gauri Singh has used her role as a bureaucrat within the Indian government to transform policy and coordinate large-scale projects on access to energy and water, poverty alleviation, women's empowerment, and sustainable development. Now, as Deputy Director-General of the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, she is well placed to influence governments around the world. Gauri and Harish, given each of your wealth of experience, I'd like to start by hearing your perspectives on how the idea of access to energy has evolved during the time you've been directly engaged.
About 15 years back is the announcement that all the villages have been connected. But when you looked at what that villages meant, it was that you had maybe 1 or 2, establishments within the village that got electricity. And that was that was how it was said that electricity access has happened. Then the next thing was that, okay, this is not fine. Let's try and at least connect 10% of the households. And then that was also not seen as being inclusive. And, many people got left out. And then the thrust came to let's get all the households connected. But again, even in India, you have habitations. Just smaller habitations where people, a few families have come together and are settled maybe near their farms and all, where we don't think that uh, in the very near future you will find electricity lines going.
I think just a parameter of saying that do people have access to energy does not mean development is taking place. So if I look at 100 years ago when there was no electricity, people will still middle class and rich. Today, even if people have 100% electricity, they are poor. So the question is the definition having access to electricity itself does not mean that. Secondly, what has happened is that it's not about access to energy. The issue is what do people do with the energy that they get is the critical issue. And innovations have not happened in the livelihood space. For examples, in the silk weaving machine, the new motors that are required for better agriculture for small scale farmers, those are missing pieces that is actually leading to, even if you had access to energy, what do you do with that, those electrons?
In recent years, more frequent and severe weather events and corresponding massive power outages have made Westerners much more conscious of how energy production and use drives climate change and how this link might affect their daily lives. But most of us are completely unaware of impacts that are already undermining social and climate justice. Harish, what do you see on the ground?
Just to give an example from animal husbandry, in many parts of India, because of heat stress, a lot of the poultry farmers, the small scale poultry, lost 30% of their chicks. Or in many places in the dairy value chain, the milk production of the cows went down by 30% because of the heat stress. Now, we don't realize that the impact of climate that is happening on the poor, if we are not able to come up with better solutions today, and that's why we said let's focus on agri, and especially for people who are owning less than 2 acres of land, because as we go and in the future generations, we don't want these 1.5 2 acre farmers to lose out on the centralization that is happening.
No, and just taking off from what you're saying, Harish, it's I've worked very closely with communities, and one of the first lessons that I learned is that when you go to a community with solutions already in your mind, then the assumption that you're really making is that when they are where they are because they don't have the bandwidth, or they're not able to think through what they need to be doing in terms of whether it's their livelihoods or whether what they want to do with their lives, which I think is such a wrong assumption, because you suddenly realize that if women, if communities are able to survive and are still staying happy in the circumstances they are, then they must be doing something right, and they must be obviously having a sense of how to survive in those circumstances. So I think it's really more about the opportunity that they haven't been provided.
So from our perspective, the Marlin, the one of for us the biggest barriers is one is the articulation of the problem statements are absolutely top down. Unfortunately, many a time the while we say that we involve the community, but the question is it's lost in translation. So the solutions that come out of those problem statements do not fit the expectations and the needs of the poor.
Let's dive further into this question of why the energy needs of small scale farmers are so important, including the fact that 85% of all farms in India are less than 2 hectares.
And so we thought, let us focus on small scale, less than 5 acre spaces. And how do you come up with the de-weeders, seed planters, millet graders, better efficiency of water utilization from millets, for example, and then work with FPOs, farmer producing organizations who are able to aggregate. And people say, oh no, large farmers can aggregate. No, if you have the FPO, the concept of farmer producing organizations, who have, for example, we work with the organic FPO called Sehat Said here nearby, who has 387 organic farmers who get together, and that the power of aggregation. So we work at the farmer level. What are the different ways of energy intervention can happen, whether it's pumping of water, gradation of millets, to cold storage for the FPO itself to keep the grains that they have bought from the farmers, to the built environment for the market linkages that the FPO has created. So, thinking agriculture from a value chain perspective, from a supply side, from an end user centric, changes the way SDG 7 should be looked at, and especially in the decentralized level.
think, what Harish is saying about value chain is so critical because I think SDG 7, which started off much more about access to electricity being defined in a very, in a very narrow sense of being able to provide just lighting to homes. I think has now the understanding has now expanded to much beyond that because it's what electricity can do for their livelihoods, and it's what the can do for education, health, and many other sectors.
I think SDG 7 should be looked as an enabler for other SDG 8 or SDG 3, that is health. And then you bifurcate SDG 8 into multiple, like SDG, like for agriculture for these. And then under the each agriculture space, you should break up it into what you call it as value chains, rice value chains, millet value chains, etc., etc. And where can actually energy play a role? And same in the animal husbandry, you should pick up like poultry, piggery, dairy, etc. From hydroponics to milking machine to storage of milk to sweet making shop, the machines can have an energy intervention per se.
Gauri, you have worked very closely with the small scale farming community in different parts of India, including large projects to roll out solutions. What else do most of us not get about people who eke out a livelihood on 2 hectares of land?
I think one of the issues that we've seen over and over again is the idea that it'll be the men using these implements, and so they're designed in a way that are very they're not so user friendly for the women who are the ones who are doing most of the farming activity. And I think it's very strange, but what can I talk about the market when the agriculture ministry and the departments themselves look at the farming community as being mostly male. And you've seen in many countries in Africa and other places that with migration happening to the cities, so it's the ones that get left behind are mostly women and who have to do sustenance farming. And if the equipment is not efficient, if it's not energy efficient, and if it's not user friendly, then it's we are starting. We would be looking at energizing something that's inefficient with renewable energy options, which I think is really not the way forward.
Exactly, the issue is when we even the innovations that have happened over the years, what she rightly said about being very male centric, because many of the things are designed, and as we keep telling this example, Marlene, is that when a rice mill that is running on diesel stops working, to start the diesel engine, not only you need a man but a strong man to start it. So the question is, it prevents women to get into the sector because it's drudgery. Or how long can a woman pottery maker make because it's like continuous physical work? Or you never hear about women blacksmithy coming up, though a lot of them would be talented to actually make that happen, or silk weaving in many ways, right? This is where I think, because the innovations were not directed towards gender centricity, and then we say, oh, women can't do it, and that's a very false narrative. So suddenly if you had a solar powered rice mill, or a solar powered pottery making, or a solar powered hammer mill, we find suddenly women blacksmithies going.
For anyone who has traveled to India, the ubiquitous roti, a smoky flavored flatbread served at almost every meal, serves as a reality check that millions of women still cook over open fires. In addition to terrible health impacts, the labor involved makes women time poor. While SELCO Foundation was not typically active in clean cooking solutions, that also changed recently. Can you tell us more, Harish?
When we started the whole concept of innovating on roti rolling machine, which is the bread making machine in India, which basically that women used to do these rotis by hand, or the breads by hand. They would do per roti, it takes around per roti or slash bread, it takes 1 minute 45 seconds, and maximum they would do able to do 200 per day to sell it to the local restaurants, right? Then what we did was we basically innovated a roti rolling with another partner who was already doing a little bit of a machine made roti rolling machine, which is a small one. They could actually go up to 1,000. So we modified it to run on solar with 1,000. And there are now women who have now come to us, and who not only bought the first machine, the second machine, and the third machine to do 3,000. Now there are women who have Recently, we installed a solar powered conveyor belt led roti making to make 10,000 rotis on a daily basis. The person who was annual income was not more than 20,000 rupees. Now she makes 10,000 rotis on a daily basis. 10,000. And she said, the three machines are, I cannot keep 4 5 machines in the room. Why don't you make the conveyor belt roti making for so we just install 3 to 4 conveyor belt roti machine to do 10,000. All, how did they come to know what the markets are, right? How did she jump from 500 roti to 10,000 rotis?
What did SELCO Foundation learn from this experience?
Just because, and we, lot of times we assume and do an analysis that it can't be done, can be done. We micromanage the solution so much that we kill the innovation from the other side, as if they don't know other. If we are able to do our partnerships and the confidence level, we would not have imagined that we would be doing solar powered conveyor belts today. So this is, and all are women led, absolutely, without. So that's where I think the power of innovation, if you truly think inclusive innovation, you open up. Like for example, in COVID, as Gauriji knows, that when lot of the sex workers and transgenders were getting out of business, we created trans kitchens, and people were, and suddenly they didn't go back to their professions after the COVID. The decentralized energy, thanks to COVID, led to respectable livelihoods for a lot of them in many ways. So that's the power of decentralized energy. It's not about solar panels, it gives a completely different meaning to social inclusion.
We talked about agriculture and gender aspects of energy for low income communities and touched on some health impacts of lack of access to modern energy services. I'd like to turn the conversation towards energy and healthcare in the Global South, where as many as 1 in 4 health centers currently has no electricity. What specific challenges and solutions arise in this sector?
And then, if you're looking at a health center in a village, typically a health center, which should be in the center of the village, but often because of the availability of land, it might actually be at quite a distance away from the village. And when you're looking at circumstances like that, and you expect that the service provider will stay for the night and also be able to attend to patients or mothers, pregnant women who come there. That's something that will not happen because the primary health centers are further down from the village, so it's fairly isolated. And then if it doesn't have electricity, then there's no way health providers going to stay there. So, these will remain as very important applications of decentralized energy and need to be understood that it's providing decentralized energy now doesn't anymore mean that you're providing inferior form.
Yeah, I think continuing to what Gauri just said, yes, exactly. Those are places where, I mean, in a sense, simple things like placement of health centers, equivalent to like when floods happen, it should be the place where a pregnant lady can confidently walk in, and which we don't design for those things. So yeah, even the place today, Marlin, same thing in cold storage systems, which leads to interventions so that the wastage does not happen at the village level of vegetables. There's an art of placing where the cold storage should be placed. So the transaction cost of the poor to travel to the cold storage, and the transaction cost of even taking it out and delivering it to the market. Sometimes people keep the flowers, which are very nice, for 4 days. But if the flowers then after that are transported at 40 degrees centigrade, is dead. So people look at, it's an art of where the placement of the should be done, and that's not taught in schools, right? It's about solar panels and cold storage, and that's needed, and we directly jump into Excel sheets without teaching that the art of placement, the art of community mobilization, the art of market linkages. Then SDG 7 becomes one part of the equation per se. It's not the solution. Yeah.
Gauri, if access to modern energy service is going to enable achievement of several of the SDGs, what does the policy sector need to do differently?
I think for most of the ministries of energy in a number of countries I've seen, there is a kind of a sense that that the ministry is only about grid electricity, because that's how modern electricity has to reach people. But there is no clarity as to who would deal with the decentralized energy options that are available. Uh, and often, it might be women empowerment that's dealing with it. It might be agriculture ministry that's dealing with it in bits and pieces. But because that very clear intent to also include decentralized options for electricity and decentralized renewable options for electricity being a very much a part of the policy framework, you find that it often gets, uh, it just becomes something that nobody owns. So the policy space is pretty much wide open because no one owns that space. And you do see some bits and pieces coming from very different ministries and departments, but doesn't come together as a very structured and a strategic way forward.
How can what happens in the policy space help or hinder the rollout of technical solutions and or the buildup of enabling ecosystems?
So the best place to start is, for example, when you have no policies, your ability to innovate is very high. And then the exciting part is that are you able to? Some of us need to play the role of the implementers. Implementers, unfortunately, do not play a role of forcing themselves to be part of the policy deciding, and then they complain. So I would say the role that we played very strongly in many years, and that's what we play today, is that how are we bringing the practitioner's perspective onto the table so the policies are framed in a way that the other technical partners and implementer partners do not go through the problems that we went actually go through. And so that's where we play the game. I think what we have to map out when we do a certain solution is who are the 5 to 10 needle movers, in a sense that at the grassroots level, if we are able to move, who is going to move the needle by 2 degrees? I step out, who are going to move it by 4 degrees? Step out, who are moving by 8 degrees? Who are moving by 10 degrees? If that mapping is done on day 1 or day 2 or day 3 when you're designing the program, then you have a target that in 3 years. So for example, if I have to look at a health center, solar powering, I have to make sure that the local doctor and the local DHO, the department, is actually convinced that this can happen. And then I need to look at the district administration, who looking at this says that can you do 10 other hospitals? Now who is the boss of district hospital is the national health, the state mission, health mission. He or she would say, oh, these guys have done, can I do it in all districts? Now the state head actually starts looking, can I actually do for every health center? Then the central ministry looks at, oh, this state has actually done it, can I actually do it for other states, or I can take it from this state.
In the policy space, what we see in countries is that while there is a lot of focus on grid electricity, but the way the habitations are generally in most of the countries, which if I'm looking at the LDCs and sub-Saharan Africa, you have a kind of a aggregation of habitation around a few towns, and then a very dispersed kind of population, uh, which doesn't really make sense if your policy focuses just on grid electricity, because the grid will never reach those areas which are very sparsely populated, because it doesn't make economic sense to be able to do that.
Harish, these are areas where SELCO Foundation has been very successful. Going forward, what is the opportunity to leverage collaboration with organizations such as IRENA to accelerate success at a much bigger scale?
These are innovations that need to grow, and that's why we piggyback on organizations like IRENA, which has a wonderful connect to Ministry of Energy of different countries, where if a one and Ministry of Finance per se through the agri space. And so if IRENA and us work together, we basically help the grassroots level innovators and entrepreneurs. Well, along with IRENA, we actually influence the Ministry of Energy and Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Finance to come up with a large scale implementation driven policies that will lead to countries opening up, because IRENA is in a better position to influence the countries at the large level, and we are in a position to actually influence the innovators and entrepreneurs to create the appropriate ecosystem. The interesting part here in the health, when we started with this work in state of Meghalaya, which is now going to 100% electrification, the first question is, have you done it in another state? Okay, and do you have a letter from the other state? And Gauri ji was the head of health in the state of Madhya Pradesh. She had given a letter to us and saying that, why don't you look at, we simply took her letter to the state of Meghalaya. Oh, you already have it from the state of Madhya Pradesh, and that too from a very senior bureaucrat. Let's go ahead. That was the power. As long as you're able to map out who the needle movers are and who the champions are, right? Like, for example, it's not Irina, or sorry, I mean, this, or I mean, it's Gauriji is a champion. You have an ex person in a champion. We need to map out who the champions are, because every organization has a face, and policy changes because of faces, irrespective what people say. It's like, it's all, we are doing it because you're here, we are here, right? It's not because some other entity is here. And that's where I think policy changes, that mapping of policy changes is equivalently important.
I'd like to take that idea one step further, Harish. We so often say policy and think government, but achieving the SDGs requires engagement across a much broader range of sectors. Who else needs to be on the policy map?
So I think, see, the question is, it's not. So we also think that, how do we influence policy? And policy does not mean always the government policy, right? It could be a policy of a local bank. It's the policy of the local government. Many a time, many of the enterprises and the funders actually confuse policy means at the central level and miss out the it is that even if a decentralized option is done with a local financial institution that actually can help in small scale financing to be unlocked, then the larger bank can actually take over. Policy itself sometimes is, even if today, Marlin, I say, if all the policies were absolutely fantastic, but there are no implementers to implement it, it actually means nothing.
It has to be, first of all, a political will, and then a clear intent in terms of a framework that allows, whether it's the ministry to do something, so a public sector doing something, or if it is a bank or others. But I also definitely agree to the point that the kind of innovations that we have seen come in this space are really far and few in between, because this again has not been considered as a market worth investing in at the scales that would allow for innovations to happen, which is very strange, because the market may not be there. If I'm not really talking about the Indian market, which of course is very large, but even there you don't see innovations that have happened.
Harish, any last thoughts in response?
I think what we should focus on, Marlin, is not to right to energy, is right to inclusive livelihoods and right to inclusive health and right to inclusive education. And automatically energy becomes part of that equation. So the question is, once you make right to energy inclusive, I can have X number of wire lines. Yes. So I think the understanding levels of what needs to be done, and number two, the policies for innovation that has needs to be done from the grassroots level, where risk capital is needed, is completely absent. And that is what I would focus on.
In the coming weeks, we will continue to bring together innovators from technology, policy, financing, advocacy, and other areas to keep investigating how distributed renewables can support development that is both inclusive of people, especially those living in under-resourced regions, and sustainable for the planet. With a new episode every 2 weeks, we'll further explore how design of energy systems can boost productivity and income in agricultural and animal husbandry, improve both health and access to healthcare, and meet growing cooling needs in hot climates. Up next, we'll learn how access to energy can help layer livelihoods to improve the resilience of millions of smallhold farmers across the global south who are already suffering the impacts of climate change. Ganesh Neelam, Executive Director of Collectives for Integrated Livelihoods and Head of Innovations and Technology at Tata Trusts, will explain how fair value chain development benefits farmers at the farm gate. In turn, Huda Jafra, director at SELCO Foundation, will help us understand the importance of layering the technology deployment ecosystems with the rural livelihoods ecosystems. For great insights into the role of energy in truly sustainable development, find us here every second week on The Energy Talk, under the series Distributed Energy for People and the Planet. For the Energy Action Project, EnAct, I'm Marilyn Smith.